Hi there. This is Sharing Global Views. A warm welcome to all of you. Thanks for joining us. Sharing Global Views is a show that we share thoughts and ideas with professionals and leaders around the globe. Gratefully, we've invited so many remarkable speakers here, and every conversation sparkles. It's like an adventure to bring more new perspectives and increase cooperation and promote sustainable development, making the world better. So what adventure shall we have today?
Hello, Helena. Nice to see you again. And welcome everyone from around the globe. Now, our Sharing Global View program is here to present different perspectives that relate to sharing economy. And I'm really glad that we come back to one of the very fundamental core sharing economy principles, and that's actually our vehicles. Now, I don't know if you still remember that back to 20 early years ago, that when we had the first Nissan Leaf, and then when we had the first hybrid car, but that trend is really taking us to today. And it's the place that we can find exponential growth of this kind of a new movement of electric energy usage. So we're really interested to have everyone to leave your message on our either LinkedIn or leave a comment on our YouTube, or whoever join us on the Zoom, leave your message during our conversation, and will be answered that right after this. So please allow me to welcome the main host of today, President Host Maria Figueres. He is also the standing chairman of the GLACE, which is the Global Alliance of the Sharing Economy. Welcome, President. How are you?
Hello, T. Hello, Elena. Hello, friends. Thank you very much for joining us on this most recent edition of Sharing Global Views. Sharing Global Views is brought to you by GLACE, the Global Alliance of Sharing Economy, a nonpartisan, non-political, nonprofit organization which seeks to promote the values, the philosophy, the ethos, and to highlight the many different entrepreneurs that are working in the space of a sharing economy. In a planet which is growing in population, but is finite in its resources, it makes all the sense in the world to move towards a green sharing economy. In the context of COP26, where we have seen important developments in this direction, it is ever so exciting to talk about the future and what that future can bring to us. And today we have as our main speaker, Bill Russo, who is the founder and CEO of Automotive Limited, who will be talking to us about how the sharing economy can power the transition to sustainable mobility, something that affects our daily life and which I am sure we are all very interested in. Bill is the Shanghai-based founder and CEO of Automotive Limited, a strategy and investment advisory firm helping its clients to create the future of mobility. His over 35 years of experience includes 16 years as an automotive executive, including 17 years of experience in China and Asia. He has also worked nearly 12 years in the electronics and information technology industries, which is a fantastic crossover from the automobile industry into the technology industry, as both of these blend towards the future. He has also worked as an advisor and consultant for numerous multinational and local Chinese firms in the formulation and implementation of their global market and product strategy. Bill also serves as the chair of the Automotive Committee at the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai. Bill has a Bachelor's of Science in Chemical Engineering from Columbia University in New York and a Master of Science degree in manufacturing from Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. He is a highly sought after opinion leader, a publisher of many articles and periodicals on this topic, and an opinion leader on the development of the Chinese market and the automotive industry. So, Bill, thank you so much for joining us here today. We are honored with your presence, and we are all ears, full of excitement to hear your presentation.
Well, thank you so much, President Figueres and the team at Glaze, and appreciate the kind introduction and also the opportunity to speak to this audience on a topic that I'm quite passionate about. That's the future of mobility, how the shared economy is powering the transition to a sustainable future. I think it's counterintuitive when you think about an industry in the transportation sector to think that it's the agent of being able to enable a sustainable future. But in fact, it's the confluence of several trends and forces that are coming together at the same time. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. I thank you for the introduction. Our business in automobility is mainly helping clients sort through the fog of disruption. As disruption happens, as transformation of an industry is storied and as old in long history laden as the automotive industry is it's very difficult to pivot from a traditional way of thinking about the industry to a new way. And that's what I'm going to describe to you today, is how the shared economy has been sort of the incipient wave of transformation of this industry's business model. I'm going to switch to slide mode, and I'll put up my initial page. I just want to make sure everything's working and that we go full screen. Can you see my full screen?
Yeah, perfect.
I assume we're good. Okay, great. And I like to kind of byline or subheading this is reimagining the future of mobility. We have to, and in order to get you to the future, I want to take you on a brief retrospective journey on how we got here. And as I said in my opening, we have to think of several kind of streams converging, right? That we've got an automotive industry with a long and storied history. We've got a consumption of energy, which you see here, and I kind of intentionally dated the chart at the point of origin of the United States, right? Because this is U.S. energy consumption. So if you think of how energy is consumed, you can see very clearly the Industrial Revolution coincided with the consumption of carbon-based energy resources. And if you juxtapose that with the automotive industry, you'll see the automotive industry, its antecedent was the horse-drawn carriage, right? The people movement device was the sedan and the horse that powered it. And we still call that box that we sit in a sedan. We still rate the performance of the engines inside of it based on what the equivalent number of horses it would be. But the origin of the automobile, the autonomous mobile device, automating the horse, was actually, let's credit that to Carl Benz, 1885. So we sit here in 2021, 136 years later, with the principal propulsion technology, the predominant propulsion technologies for the mobility devices that serve us as having been invented in the late 19th century. But we can't give all the credit to Carl Benz. We should also tip our hat to Henry Ford, who turned the car from a rich person's toy to a more democratized device with the Model T and the commercialization of a mass-produced automobile. That was the car everyone, or at least the middle-class population, could afford. Over the course of the 20th century, you could see a coincidental rise. It wasn't coincidental, it's directly related in petroleum consumption as the car became popularized, the golden era of the automobile, the middle of the 20th century. Come to the late 20th century and early 21st, now we start to see the introduction of electric propulsion. I show at the bottom sort of the new energy, the clean energy, green energy, just to show that it's starting to make its presence known in the energy mix, but the dominant energy resource is still carbon-based, still fossil fuel-based derived, and it's no coincidence that the rise in mass commercialization of transportation devices is the single largest consumer of that carbon-based energy. So the question you have to ask is, where are we going from here? Where are we going from here? Now that we've seen the advent of electric propulsion, what will be the future of mobility? What will power these vehicles? That gets a lot of attention today. But very importantly, what are the internet era features? I show that red dot point of the modern internet was born. The internet wasn't born in the 1980s. It started to become commercialized to the consumer internet in the latter part of the 20th century. It actually had its origin in academia and military in the middle of the 20th century. But when it started to turn into a personal computer network device market is in the late part of the 20th century. Why is that important? Because it's now the agent of the disruption that we're seeing in the auto and transportation sector. The shared economy is made possible by the advent of the consumer-facing internet. So the question is, how and where will we use these vehicles? In what use cases will they be deployed? But what's very clear is the markets have started to weigh in favor of these disruptors. When you look at valuations, Tesla's come down a bit since Elon Musk announced he's going to be selling 10% of his shares, but $1.23 trillion as of last Friday. It's a bit more than 1 trillion now, almost 10 times the valuation of Daimler, Mercedes, its parent company. So when you look at traditional auto companies on the right, Mercedes, General Motors, Ford, far behind in terms of how they're perceived in the markets as being the forebears of the future of mobility. Even Uber today, a shared mobility app-based company, is a $91 billion valuation. If you look to China, the world's largest digital economy, the same can be said. It's not how many cars that are being sold, is how much do the companies that are entering the market, the emerging companies, the shared economy companies that have been born out of the internet investments, how much are they worth? And the answer is far more than traditional companies who sell far more units. It's an indication that the industry's business model isn't going to be based on how many cars you sell, but how disruptive are you to the business model of the industry itself. And if we look to the energy economy, you'll see a similar story. A green energy company called NextEra Energy, with a $167 billion valuation, comparable, I would say, to ExxonMobil. They were actually higher than ExxonMobil at a point in time, but compare the revenue, 1/10 the revenue, and almost comparable valuation. It's an indication that the capital markets are voting on the future, and they see these new companies emerging in the green and sustainable categories as far more valuable than the traditional companies that have been the champions of the 20th century. So if we think of why this is important, why mobility is at the core of this development, you have to think about it in the context of today. In today's world, growing urban population densities, which pose a significant burden on city resources, on traffic congestion. The economic expansion globally has been in large part been driven by people moving from rural environments to urban environments to increase their economic earning potential. If we urbanize those cities become more congested and more polluted. And we certainly experience that in particular here in Asia. Vehicular and industrial activity are the main sources of pollution. Transportation is the largest consumer of fossil fuel energy resources. And in the world today, we have 1.4 billion cars. And think of this, the average utilization rate of the cars that are out there is approximately 5% of the time. That means we buy a car, use it on average 1 hour a day, and it sits parked 23 hours a day. Why do we have so much congestion? Because we have so much underutilization of the transportation equipment that we personally own. If the transportation equipment is in a services platform, we can increase, in a shared platform, we can increase the utilization rate and serve mobility more efficiently by reducing the number of vehicles that we're deploying into the population. That's not good news if you're a company trying to sell cars. In fact, you profit from the underutilization of the vehicles that are out there. But what does the shared economy do? What does the internet do? It allows you to dynamically and efficiently match demand for mobility with the supply of the vehicles. The shared economy in that way can power the transition to a more sustainable mobility solution set. Now, let me describe sort of the conditions of the world. This is how world population is deployed. Why does Asia have the largest problem here? Well, because it's where most of the people live. The South Asia, East Asia region, if you drew a circle around this part, the circle that I have right here, more than 50% of the world's population lives inside that circle. Okay? So, and China has the largest number of mega cities. And if you forecast population growth as shown here, that'll only increase. The urbanization is only going to become more severe, which means we need a more sustainable solution for how we move people around. Now, here's some good news, that in that circle that I just drew, in that part of the world, in that region where most of the people live, in fact, most people don't own cars. If you look at automotive, personally owned vehicles, in terms of four-wheel transportation, small, medium, and large cars, you can see the blue shade. The blue shade is just a small slice in some of the world's largest population centers, which means a lot of mobility is being served in other form factors. In fact, there is a lot of sharing going on. Buses, public transportation, metro, those types of form factors. So in the red circle, more people ride than drive, which means they don't have the same problem in terms of underutilization of assets. The assets on average are actually more productive if they're using shared mobility. But unfortunately, we've started to addict East Asia, even South Asia, to the idea of owning vehicles. As their economies rise, people can afford to own. They start to climb up the ladder and purchase vehicles. The good news is the shared economy is intervening and creating alternative ways for people to become mobile without having to take possession of the physical asset. Let's now divide the world into three segments. W1, let's call that China. W1, average cars per thousand in China, actual number is 212. The United States is about 800. Okay, that's far more cars penetration than in China. But the Western markets, colored in blue, are more than 400 cars per thousand people. Emerging markets, far less than 400. In fact, China, as I said, 212. Even with the world's largest automotive industry, it's still underpenetrated in terms of personal ownership of vehicles. And what does that mean? It means that if you look at the population distribution in a country like China, W1, where far more people ride than drive, then most of the mobility is actually being dispensed through a shared platform, called public transportation. In the West, in the W2 markets, where people predominantly get around on their own wheels, right? I showed that in dark blue and light blue, personally owned vehicles is the predominant mode of transportation in the developed markets. You have more ownership than you have usership. You have more people owning and driving themselves than you have people taking public transport. And in fact, you've designed cities in ways where it precludes public transportation. You live far away from where you work. You live in the suburbs. You commute to the city. You take your car with you. You have to park it. It's the problem, the affliction that we have with too many cars congesting the roads today in most of the world's population centers. But in the emerging markets, different condition. W3, these triangles are shown proportionate to the population sizes of the place. So W3 would be the gray markets that I showed on the previous page. Far, far more people. In fact, the pyramid would be actually flatter than this in terms of ownership versus usership. Far more people using than actually owning. What's shown here, let me define that acronym, ODM, on-demand mobility, shared mobility. What that is app-enabled access to mobility. Uber, Lyft, Didi in China, if you have an app that can summon a vehicle, that's on-demand mobility, okay? And what that did is it presented an alternative to ownership. It presented people who lived in cities with a way to access mobility without having to physically possess, drive, park, and burn more fuel than is required. In fact, if a car gets more utilization, you don't need as many cars, right? Because you're serving mobility. The demand for mobility, what I showed on the previous page, was PKM. I didn't define that. I mean, define that. Passenger kilometers movement. The size of the pie is an indication of how much mobility is happening in that country or region, right? PKM is the demand. The number of vehicles is the supply. If you imprecisely match then you're going to have more vehicles than you need if the assets are underutilized. So basically, the emerging markets, more people ride than drive. The opportunity for the shared economy to have an impact is far, far greater in number than what you'll find in the West. In the West, you've got multi-generational habits of owning and operating and driving your vehicle. In China and the other emerging markets, far more people have not driven their own car. Even if they do have a driver's license, they probably don't drive their car every day. They occasionally use, instead of use it every day for day-to-day to and from work types of commuting. So when we think of what is the impact on the types of products or vehicles, and when we own a vehicle, we're at the top of the pyramid. We own a vehicle for the emotional connection, for the sense of self-image and accomplishment it gives us. We like the experience of driving. We drive, and brag about the driving experience. When you're in a shared mobility experience, it's about convenience. It's about saving time. It's about being productive when being transported. It's about smart purchasing, being able to pick the price point and the time that you're willing to wait. It's about an appeal for the riding comfort and the experience of being transported. It's a different characteristic of what a person expects from the shared mobility experience than the personal ownership and driving experience. And why is that important? Because that's the kind of vehicles that we'll be designing in the future for the markets that have a high uptake of shared mobility. And the market that by far, the place I live here in Shanghai, I lived here in China for 17 years. It was a bike economy for a long time. It became an automotive industry of size and scale as the economy rose. But what changed the game was the advent of the smartphone, the Internet of Things. When we think of the Internet, when I showed you that dot point in the 1980s, the creation of smart devices that we now carry with us, we're connected to the Internet all the time. In China, there are nearly as many people using the Internet through a smartphone or a smart portable device as there are Internet users. So basically, everybody's on the Internet with their smartphone. Almost 1 billion people, virtually every single one of them on a portable mobility device. And they book services through that device. When we think of the Internet model, it has this, what we call open structure for information model, this 7-layer structure. That's an IT person's lingo. But let me put that in automotive language. When you bring the Internet of Things to the automobile, you're basically creating a smart device. You're turning the car into a smart platform. It's still a physical asset. It still moves people. It still moves goods, but it has intelligence. And when it's a smart device, it then can be a platform for app-enabled services. And what is the game changer for this industry and this industry business model is it now brings Internet of Things companies to the solution set. It's no longer the purview just of the automotive industry to innovate and create the next generation of mobility solution. It is now partly a technology-driven economy, right? So when we say how the shared economy powers the transition, it's in large part because the shared economy sees the automotive industry as highly embedded, sees the mobility industry, I should call it, highly embedded in their digital ecosystem of services, right? It wants to provide a payment for mobility. It wants to collect that day-to-day transactional revenue associated with our movement. Why? Because they can do business with us every day. Each and every human being on the planet moves multiple times every single day, and the Internet wants to capture that transactional relationship. with the end user. That's an important thing. It's the frequency. It's not the amount of units you sell, it's the frequency of the transactional relationship that the shared economy is interested in capturing. So when the top of the stack companies, the top of this stack companies come into this game, is because they see a high frequency customer engagement opportunity. And in order to capture that opportunity to the largest number of users, you provide mobility related services to those users. That's the new game. That's what we call the new automobility game. The old game is selling units. The new game is serving miles. And it happened, though. It's happening. We're not talking about something that hasn't happened. We're talking about a lot of this has already happened. Wave one is the on-demand mobility era. That happened a decade ago, and it made it possible to book a car, a traditional car, with a driver through an app. What we now see happening is because of the frequency of movement and because a car in high utilization can be made more economical if it's powered by electricity versus powered by gas, because you can reduce fuel cost and you can reduce maintenance cost if it's electronic instead of mechanical, purely mechanical, then you upgrade it to an EV. So the auto industry is massively now shifting into investment in new energy propulsion, right? In part because we brought it into being in large measure because of more and more consumption of shared mobility. ADAS, advanced driver assistance technologies, building digital ecosystems. So we see the building blocks of intelligent connectivity coming into the vehicle, making the car a smart device. When you make a car smart, when you increase its software-defined architecture, you then make it possible to add digital and other energy management solutions on top of it. You make it monetizable in more ways than just when it's sold. It's monetized when it's sold, it's monetized when it moves in service, and it's monetized as an energy storage device because you can store and trade the energy. It's monetized as a digital platform. That's what the Internet of Things will do, is it will find more ways to milk the cow. It's not just sold as beef, it's milked as dairy, right? It has monetization potential when it's alive, not just when it's manufactured and sold. That's the new industry business model. The old industry business model on the left is build vehicles, sell them, and service them. The right-hand side is put the user in a car, put the person in a car, move them around, monetize the movement, collect data about the movement, monetize the data, monetize the energy, monetize the service to the vehicle, high utilization rate. You have to maintain it as a services platform. The industry business model on the right is far more efficient at capturing downstream revenues than the industry model on the left, which is basically selling hardware and servicing hardware. These are the leading on-demand mobility players in China. Again, large market for mobility, high demand. It's not just people movement, it's people and goods movement. There are multiple form factors, small, medium, large. There's different distances of travel. You can see bike sharing. You can see ride hailing. You can see time sharing of EVs through a EV card type of car sharing program. They're all in play here in China, and they're all kind of, even in the post-COVID era, most of these companies have actually grown because the upgrading from public transport to individual personal urbanized mobility is still very strong, very popular in China. Now, when we think of the economics of the industry, the traditional automotive industry business model shown here on the left is basically a hardware-centric business model. We have multiple ways of monetizing a device. We can sell it as product, which is the gray layer. That's the new vehicle sale. We can service it. That's still hardware. That's replacing parts. And then we can monetize it in service. So the services economy is still a smaller slice of the pie, but it's going to be the part of the pie that grows in size, monetizing the on-demand mobility and the urban delivery services. And this only talks about mobility. If you add to that mix energy and digital services, digital solutions through the app economy, it's an even greater exponential growth in terms of revenue potential. So we think by 2030, more money is going to be made from the usage of the car than from the manufacturing and sale of the car and even the replacement parts. So it's becoming a digital economy dominated business model. And when you think of the digital economy, yes, there's hardware. You have to have a device. That device has to be smart. It has to collect the data on the driver, the vehicle, the surroundings, and then upload it to the cloud, right? Cars with sensors, those are becoming data sponges. They're collecting information about us and our movements. And we move around all the time. We cause things to move all the time. We can analyze that with software. That's the analytics part, right? That's analyzing the data that has been collected and drawing business insights from the data. And then what the internet does very well, what the digital economy does very well, is it profiles us and says all of that data that we've collected can be turned into monetizable revenue and through a personalized services ecosystem that surrounds the individual. So that's what the shared economy sees, is it sees us as the product, not the cars as the product. When we kind of put ourselves into that future world, obviously populations are going to still be concentrated in urban areas. We're not going to undo that. People are going to migrate to cities, especially in large markets like we have in East Asia and South Asia. Asia and Africa will be accounting for 90% of that urbanization expansion. And shared services are going to fulfill the bulk of the people and goods movement. So of the miles traveled, both people, PKM, people kilometers of movement, and TKM, tonnage of goods movement, both are going to be served mainly through the shared economy, through some app-based trigger that caused the movement to occur. And that is a far more efficient way than in the pre-internet era, right? The internet of mobility is a far more efficient way to match demand than supply. If you don't have app-enabled goods consumption, then you have to put up physical stores and people have to travel to the stores to go get the goods and bring them back home, right? The shared economy made it possible for us to sit at home, do more consumption at home without having to physically move and not burn carbon as a result of us moving to and from the store. So the smart transportation city, the smart city, think of these kind of terms to kind of describe it. It's more personalized versus mass. It's car sharing and ride hailing is the predominant mode for people movement. It's going to have different form factors. You can see in this cartoon here, different form factors for different types of movement, different distances of movement. But the user experience can be unified, that will be served with digital services in a consistent way across those different form factors. Cloud-enabled, personalized, user-centric ways of serving mobility. Low or zero emission vehicles, autonomous, yes, self-driving vehicles. We already see a lot of that technology being piloted and deployed into both people and goods movement services here in China, as well as in other markets. Think of not just the internet of mobility, also the internet of energy. Energy can also be stored, managed, traded as an asset. And that's part of what an energy storage device that exists within the vehicle can help do, is offload some of the wasted energy we throw away by storing it in a static device called the vehicle and then having it traded through the smart grid. Returning space to the people, right? Right now, we underutilize assets. We've got to park and we've got to consume space with highway and road. We can give that space back to the city to make cities more livable and more enjoyable places for people to hang around in. Ubiquitous mobile connectivity and telecommuting and virtual presence, reducing the need for people movement. So I think those are sort of the characteristics I would leave you with of what a future of mobility world will look like. And I hope you all get to experience it. This is us. We're located here in Shanghai as our main headquarters. We have operations in Hong Kong and in Tel Aviv. And I thank again you for your attention and your time. And I think we have time now for Q&A.
Unmuting myself. Bill, thank you for a most exciting tour de table. Thank you for a wonderful presentation on how the sharing economy is changing the world of mobility and of how mobility and technology are merging together at a very fast pace. I was taken by the capex, the capitalization of companies, new companies and old companies that you started off with, which shows very clearly how the markets are betting on these companies of the future, which have been coming in more recent years into the space of mobility. Now, the way after what I would call a slow start, EVs are finally taking off in China. What are the main drivers of that? And do you see that?
I think we talked about the fact that the shared economy was the sort of the incipient wave, right? Mm-hmm. The on-demand mobility. When you use a car more frequently, you change the economics of how quickly you can get a return on the investment in the energy savings that you get from an EV. That certainly was always the promise, but you never used the car enough to recover the upfront penalty you had to pay when an EV costs more than a traditional car. So one of the drivers is the economics of a more frequent mobility use case that pulls the EV into a more economically favorable condition. You burn less fuel, it's an easier to maintain platform. But that's just part of it. In China, big shared economy, definitely favorable toward EV. But the other thing in China that's very, very special is they invested heavily in not only subsidizing the manufacturers to invest in the technology. They did that. They have a unique ability to do that. But they also invested in building the infrastructure needed for the convenient everyday use of the electric vehicle, the recharging facilities. You know, if you think of Tesla being the pioneer globally in the electrification race, clearly shown with the market capitalization that they have, that the markets have concluded that they have not only first mover advantage, they probably have lapped everybody on the circuit. But on top of that, what you have is a development that says that the infrastructure burden that Tesla had to make in building a supercharger network, no company had to do that in China, right? That was public and private partnership. There's something in China that's very common, PPP, public-private partnership, the creation of infrastructure that is used by the customers of the products being produced by the manufacturer. By building the public and private recharging infrastructure needed for people to conveniently use a car as an EV every day, it de-risked the manufacturers from having to bear that burden. And that's an important aspect of why China took off earlier than other markets.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Bill, you've recently co-authored a very interesting article on the future of hydrogen. And so, of course, now we're all about EVs, but hydrogen vehicles or hydrogen-fueled vehicles seem to be coming up over the horizon in a more relevant way than they were in the past. What's your take on that, and where do you see hydrogen playing an important role on the energy base of the future?
Yeah, I think first thing is I think it is a controversial topic because some will say, well, you know, how did you get the hydrogen, right? How did you create the hydrogen? It was the process used to create it green. That's an important question. And are there ways to generate clean hydrogen that are renewable? Yes, right. And first of all, water electrolysis is the path to green hydrogen. But how you generate the energy that generated the reaction to create the electrolysis is also a question. You have to think about, you know, how am I creating it, the energy resource. But I think before you even get into that debate, and the answer is yes, you can create it in a more sustainable way. There are ways. They're not scaled yet. The predominant way hydrogen is generated is not green in today's world. So if you measure the hydrogen economy and the fuel cell development for propulsion against today's state of the art, you have to say it's not as good as other alternatives in terms of sustainability. But that's not a permanent condition. There are ways to make it more sustainable. The second question that you have to ask is, why are you doing this? Yes, you want a green future. You want a clean, green future. You want a sustainable future. But there's another motivation here, and that's securing the energy supply chain, right? The energy supply chain that powered the economy, and the largest consumption agent in that energy mix was transportation. But that supply chain was carbon-based. That energy supply chain, at least from the viewpoint here in China, was not secured within the domestic borders or even in the One Belt, One Road corridor of China. So securing the energy supply chain is one of the core motivations of the pivot to electrification and or what China likes to call new energy vehicles. And in the mix for new energy vehicles in China are battery electric vehicles, plug-in hybrid, and fuel cell electric vehicles. And fuel cell electric vehicles and hydrogen economy are prioritized in China, still heavily subsidized because of the security of the energy resources needed for a hydrogen economy. China has all of what it needs if it pivots to new energy consumption. And hydrogen economy does fit very well into that mix.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Friends, if you have questions, please put them on the chat here on our Zoom, or please send them into our LinkedIn where we will take them and pose them to Bill. Elena, any questions coming in your way?
Yes, actually, I have a question. Here is it. Built software-defined vehicle has become a popular term in auto industry. Do you believe car companies will pivot to becoming tech or software companies in the near future?
Well, can they become software companies? I think that's a stretch. Having digital DNA is not in everybody's wheelhouse. Having the ability to create a software-defined vehicle is more of a tech. We're talking about the Internet of Things applied to a device called an automobile, right? Can we define it, that architect, that OSI architect? When you say software-defined, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about not a dumb device, but a smart device that is monetizable by its connectivity features. The connectivity features built into it allow it to be a platform for mobility and other digital services. If you build a software-defined vehicle, if you have the capability, I think the question is, should they or must they? The answer is yes. Can they all do it? Not everyone's going to be able to do it to the same level as others, right? So the companies that are being invested by or are partnering with digital ecosystem players are going to be advantaged over others. So if you think China, you have to think NIO, invested by Tencent, Xpeng, invested by Alibaba, Li Auto, early investor in that was Meituan. So there are internet companies that have sprinkled and have woven their digital DNA into the fiber of their being. I think automotive companies who were not born that way have added electronics, but they have not created software-defined architectures. And that's where they have to go. If they want to profit from the top of that stack that I showed you where all the growth is, they have to be software-defined. If they are not, then they're only going to be able to grow incrementally, if at all, because their business model is limited to hardware sales and hardware maintenance.
Thank you, Bill. A question that has just come in, Bill, has to do with economies of scale on the price of EVs. So you mentioned that the premium on EV vehicles has come down over the years in a very spectacular way. And the question we have here is, do you see any further gains through economies of scale and implementation of new technologies in bringing the price of EVs further down?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. With scale comes cost reduction. Obviously, there are new and innovative technologies that are being created that are going to increase the energy density, which reduces the cost per kilowatt hour. If you increase the denominator, you definitely reduce the cost equation significantly. So we're at a glide path where EVs are going to reach parity in terms of competitiveness on cost with the internal combustion engine. Now, that doesn't mean for every battery chemistry. There are certain battery chemistries that will scale faster than others. You're going to have different price performance characteristics of different types of vehicles. What China did is they embraced a battery chemistry, lithium iron phosphate, which they have some of the largest battery cell makers in the world embracing, BYD, CATL in particular. They drive the price point down to the level where the middle of the market can afford, and even some of the more high frequency use cases would prefer having vehicles like that in their fleet. So yes, the innovations will happen. We're now at the pace of the technology of tech, right? Tech upgrades constantly, whereas automotive industry, mechanically engineered car upgrades gradually. So I think we're going to see EVs become much more cost effective over the next several years as the industry scales in size.
That's great news. Great news for the future. Bill, we're coming to the end of our presentation here. Any closing thoughts or closing remarks from you? And thank you again for a wonderful presentation.
Well, thanks so much for the opportunity. It's an exciting time. I think for those of us who have lived in the world of the automotive industry for as long as I myself have moved to Detroit in 1987, I've spent half of my career in automotive in the US and the other half here. But there's been no more exciting time than the last decade. And I think the next 10 years are going to bring more change than we've seen in our lifetime. And that's exciting.
Bill, thank you so much. It has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you for sharing generously. It is indeed exciting to see the world of transportation change in the way that it has, and become so much a part or interfaced with the sharing economy, of course, which is a future not only for transportation, but for so many other things in our daily lives. So thank you, Bill. Friends, thank you ever so much for having joined us on this conversation with Bill Russo. We will see you again in a couple of weeks on Sharing Global Views. Goodbye, hasta luego. Thank you ever so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you, Bill.